Welcome, first of all, to Intro to Bookbinding with Stephanie Bogle, a very talented designer and proudly co-hosted with Papercut. A bit about us. Papercut Zine Library is a physical world library, although with over 16,000 zines in our collection. We're currently closed for browsing due to COVID, obviously, but we have an online collection at papercutzinelibrary.com that you can check out. And then the other things we do are skill shares like this, as well as Girl Skate Day. But enough about us. About our presenter today, Stephanie is a very talented graphic designer based in Boston. She attended Mass Art and developed her skills, her wheat skills in crafts of bookbinding and typography. And we're very excited to have her with us today. So I'm just gonna hand it off. Let's get started.
Great. So can everyone see me and a screen with a slide on it?
Yep.
Yes, excellent. It's working. Great. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm really excited. Basically, this is just like a really cursory look at bookbinding and how to make books and, possibly jumpstart anybody looking to do bookbinding as a hobby. I really like making books just as a creative outlet. I'm not a professional bookbinder or anything, but I think I know enough to be dangerous or give this intro. So let's jump in here. Basically, the way that I'm going to set this up is I have this deck of several slides, and I'm hoping to kind of buzz through this in 20-30 minutes. And then the second half of the workshop, I actually have prepared 2 different binding technique demos. So one of those requires just a few tools, needle, thread, paper. If you want to do it along with me, that's great. And then the second one just requires a couple more tools. So if we have time, we can do that too, and you can just watch me do it. So I'm going to buzz through this deck first. Generally, what I'm going to cover here is just why bookbind, or why you might want to get started with it as a hobby. Book anatomy, so just going over what sort of all books have in common and considerations just based around sort of what makes up a book. Overview of some tools and materials, so just things that you might want to kind of add to your toolkit as you're getting started. Then I'll go sort of a little deeper into some techniques, so just sort of ways to bind books that are kind of sort of the main ways to do it. There are obviously variations, but I think it's good to just know just a few example techniques, and then just some references and material considerations and things like that. So again, I like to bookbind as a creative outlet, watch TV, listen to music, make some books. Bookbinding is also great if you are looking to info share or make zines. So if you're kind of wanting to print your own material, making your own book is a really great way to, just fully do it independently. You can distribute your own books this way. So zine making, obviously. Journaling, some people like to make their own journals, which I think is really nice, because then you can kind of consider the way that the book looks for that phase that you're journaling about or something like that. And people can sort of create these collections of their journals, and they all kind of have a specific look to them. I rely so much on my bookbinding for making gifts for people, just because it's a really nice way you can make it specific to the person that you're giving it to, like their favorite color, or choosing like paper that has a pattern that has things that they like on it, or something like that. And so that's useful. And then generally I use a lot of the tools that I have from bookbinding to kind of jumpstart myself in other crafts. Like I use a lot of my bookbinding tools for like leather work that I just sort of felt like doing one day. And then embroidery sort of requires a few of the same tools as well. So this, I think, is a good way to get started with jumpstarting other hobbies. So I'm going to just talk about book anatomy. There are so many kinds of books, and obviously we'll be talking about ones that will be hand making. But there are obviously magazines and coffee table books, store-bought books, but they all sort of have a few things in common. All books will typically have a cover, text pages, and then binding, which kind of adhere these things together. and create opportunities for, designing and selecting materials for each of these. And there's sort of endless amounts of combinations for like the different kinds of books that you make based on, what you select for each of these three things. So the cover of a book is, typically thicker than the inside pages and will sort of indicate what's on those inner pages. Generally, it's there to protect the book. The text pages or the text block is sort of stacked of folded or loose sheets that make up sort of the bulk of the book. So that's where all your content is going to go if you're printing things in a handmade book, or if you're writing in a handmade book, that's obviously where all the stuff's going to go. And then the binding is how those things all come together and are literally connected. So the binding connects the text pages to one another, and it also connects them to the cover. So, we'll be looking today at mostly needle and thread, just because it requires a couple less tools, but you could also use staples, glue, and a combination of these things to kind of get different types of binding methods. So this is an example of just how those things come together. This method is called the saddle stitch, where you kind of push staples or thread through like an entire stack of folded sheets, and then once you fold it, you kind of have your book. And a lot of zines are saddle stitched, for example. This diagram is just sort of like a diagram of a case-bound book. So I think of these sort of hardcover books as sort of like the ultimate as far as like having all different kinds of stuff that you need to make them. And I like to bring this up just when we're talking about book anatomy, because it kind of has just, it has like a lot into it. And so you can pull elements out from like the ultimate case-bound book to kind of integrate into more simpler binds. And it just is helpful to know kind of the anatomy of it. So essentially here is the text block or the text pages. These are sort of signatures of pages that are all glued together. And that's attached to the hardcover or the case using end papers. And typically end papers are kind of bright in color. They're literally glued to the text block and then glued to the case or the hardcover. Books will have a spine, and then we'll also see some books that have headbands, which are sort of just like a little piece of decorative fabric that is like applied between the text block and the case, and it just sort of hides the glue here. So I have an example of a hardcover book here. I didn't make this book, but I have in the past, and it just takes a little bit of time and practice, but really anybody can do it. So this is the end papers of this book here. The text block is obviously here, and you can see the headband is like the little red piece that kind of covers where the glue is. So that's just an example of a hardcover book. Oops, hard mode, but I mean, you could do it. It just takes time. I also just wanted to pull a few tools and materials just as far as like, if you want to start buying a couple of things, if you really want to get started making more books or exploring different kinds of binding styles, it's good to have just like a core set of things that you can sort of build on as you start wanting to make more books. So generally, I recommend getting sort of 4 key things if you want to sort of start making more books and explore binding styles. The first is an Olfa knife, and I have some of my tools here, which I can just show you on video. So this is what an Olfa knife is. Basically, it's like a box cutter, but you can kind of, sort of change how long the blade is. And it's important to have one of these rather than using scissors, because it gives you just a really straight cut. It allows you to cut multiple pages at a time. If like you have a stack of paper, you can cut a lot at once. And then the other kind of half of that tool is an aluminum ruler. So this is my ruler here. Essentially what you would do is like have a page on your cutting mat, lay the ruler down on it, and then you'd be able to sort of make straight cuts, like kind of pushing these two things up together. And then obviously the cutting mat just allows you to sort of like make cuts without like destroying your working space. And it also sort of self-heals, so it sort of accepts the blade. So I would definitely recommend getting these 3 things. And then one other essential that I would probably recommend getting is a bone folder. And what this is it allows you to score paper. So you would run it up against your ruler like you would the knife, but it would just create a score. So it allows you to make really neat like scores so you can fold paper. It's also great for like if you're mounting two pieces of paper together. So if you glue two pieces of paper together to make one thicker sheet, you can kind of rum your bone folder against it the flat way to sort of get air bubbles out and stuff like that. So those are sort of the main things that I would recommend just getting for any type of binding style. As far as like binding and mounting tools, it really depends on the type of book that you want to make. I think, you know, doing a binding method that requires needle and thread is sort of like the least amount of tools that you would need. But if you want to start getting into books that, you know, you want to bind using glue, it would be good to obviously get, you know, binders glue and things like this. So the last thing I'll just mention while we're here, and when I do my demo, I can sort of show you more in depth how I use some of these things with paper. But the last thing I'll just mention is having an awl is also a good idea if you want to be doing sort of sew binding. So what this is basically just like a thick needle attached to a handle, and it's just a little bit easier to hold as far as like puncturing holes in paper for you to run your thread through it. So that I use a lot. And then another thing that's sort of like an upgraded of that is a screw punch tool. So what this does is something similar where you can kind of make holes in pages, but it's just a little bit easier because you just press down and it makes like a perfect little hole. Moving along from that. So also obviously what you need to make books besides tools are materials. So this is like, you know, choosing cover material or thick paper, different paper types. Covers can also be made from like book cloth or fabric, leather. And then binding, obviously having different types of thread is nice if you want to be able to sort of choose the color of the thread that you use for your book. Staples, screw posts. So these are just sort of different kinds of sort of materials that you can use to bind. And then text pages, just having like lots of paper. And, you know, obviously that can be different colors too, and different sort of feels to them. So here just basically, I just recommend getting materials as you have projects that you want to make. Like I totally buy things sometimes and then just like never use them. And so if you have something specific in your head, there's no need to get like a ton of stuff all at once. It really, like I have like a lot of stuff, but it's just like as a result of kind of collecting random things over the years. And then obviously giving yourself space to work. So this could be just like a table or the floor. Like I've made a lot of books on the floor. Does that all make sense? I don't know if there was any questions in the chat before going into the techniques at all.
Yeah, we have one question in the chat. What is thread wax?
Oh, thread wax. Yeah. Yeah. So basically thread wax is literally just a little brick of beeswax. And what that does is like I have a big bag of embroidery thread that's just literally like this stuff. I don't know if you can see like that stuff. And since it's cotton thread, or I don't know exactly what the material it's made out of, it doesn't you know, hold up as strong. Like if you want to have like a book that's like really tightly bound together, it's good to actually wax the thread so that it's easier to kind of push through the paper and it just becomes a bit more strong for the book. So the fibers aren't like coming off and all that. So definitely not like super necessary, but I always wax my thread because I have the wax. And if you want to get into it, I recommend getting that too.
Thanks. Can you use like candle wax as like a hacky alternative?
I was thinking about this earlier today. I was like, you could probably use candle wax or like chapstick, like that's beeswax too, right? So I don't know. I think that yeah, but then if there's like pigment with it, then you would just have to know like that might come off on your paper or something like that. Yeah, I think this I did get from like Blick or something like that too. So it was probably a couple dollars. Great. Is there any other questions or?
Folks want to chime in? All right, seems like we can keep going.
Excellent.
Sorry, just as you took a drink.
No, that sounds great. Awesome. So I just put this section together and it kind of just breaks down some of the typical ways that books are bound. So what I'll be showing in the demo is a saddle stitch book and then a stab bound book, which both are kind of using thread, a needle and thread to bind the pages together. So a saddle stitch book is essentially, I think these are probably the most common types of books because they're so quick and easy to make. Any book that has sort of like a staple on the spine is a saddle stitch book if it's sewn together. But basically what it is a set of folded sheets that are connected all together just right through the cover and sort of along the spine, and that's how they're attached. I have a couple examples of saddle stitch books. This is a book that I made, and it's basically the staples that I chose are kind of green, so it matches the green paper. I kind of wanted them to be hidden, but since obviously this is just a stack of folded sheets, all kind of connected together with staples. This is sort of a more interesting one that I've done that it has sort of this funky half cover on it, but it's basically still just kind of attached through the cover, and then the sheets on the inside are folded like that. The reason why saddle stitch is so common, I think, too, is that it lays flat when it's open. So you can kind of just leave it open on the table if you want. They're easy to write in, and you can kind of fold them backwards to sort of get like your half size as well. So these are just sort of a good, quick, easy book to make. And you can still make fun decisions as far as like thread color and like the cover pattern and things like that. So not too much compromise. And this is probably the most common book that I've made personally. And then I just included a couple diagrams. There are definitely variations on all these types of bookbinding. So like you could have many holes that kind of create more sewing machine looking sort of pattern, but this one is sort of the most common, just the 5-hole saddle stitch. A stab bound book is a book that takes sort of loose sheets of paper and a cover page and then actually just stabs right through them to the end, to the back cover. And so they're kind of not connected at the spine and just are kind of going straight through. So again, this can be, you can use staples or thread for this. I like these because they are kind of just as easy, but they have a more interesting kind of textured look to the book. And, I think you can kind of see the thread a little bit better. And there's so many different kind of patterns that you can do with these kind of books. I actually haven't really done many of these like interesting looking patterns just because it would take a little bit longer and I just haven't really done that before. But I think this is another kind of easier way to sort of get that cool handmade look to it. And I have an example here of one that I've done. This one I made this year actually. And so I kind of had this cool craft paper as a cover, and then I just used red thread and kind of, as you can see, has like kind of a cool texture to it. The one crappy thing about this method is that it doesn't really lay flat, so it's kind of hard to like you couldn't just leave it open on a table. So usually when I do this, I kind of have things printed inside them or just have something written in them because they're more kind of like about flipping and looking at stuff in your hands. So so that's a stab bound book. And then here's just a little diagram here. I always have to look at these diagrams when I'm doing anything like this. I always forget how. A perfect bound book is a method that uses glue. So again, like the stab bound book, this uses loose sheets of paper that are glued together at the spine of the book. And like the stab bound book, they don't lay flat necessarily unless you're sort of sewing it as well. But a lot of magazines are perfect bound, and I think the reason magazines kind of can because the pages are much larger and much thinner, so that they can kind of lay flat like at the ends, but the spine itself will sort of like this image here kind of lay open, and it's a little bit harder to achieve that when you're hand making a book as well. This is a perfect bound book that I made this week. So as you can see, there's kind of glue right here. I don't know, it's not focusing on it, but basically the pages are glued on the inside, and then I attached the text block to the cover using the end pages. So that's like this more crafty paper here. So that's another one that's kind of good to hold and read if you want to print things in that. This is just blank, just as an example. And then, so here's a diagram for that. And I can totally share this PDF too, if this just creates inspiration for anybody. Another common technique would be the Coptic stitch. So basically with a Coptic stitch, I don't have an example of this. I'm not sure if I've ever made one that kind of looks like this, that's exposed. But basically what it is sort of a set of signatures. So a signature is sort of, you know, a number of pages that are folded together to create sort of like little booklets, and then you sew all those tiny booklets together, you know, typically using like thick thread like this, and then it's attached to the cover just with that same thread. So I find this one a little bit harder to do, and that's, I think, just because it takes a little bit of practice to get the sheets to kind of like be pressed together tightly. But it also has like a super interesting look to it, and it can be hardcover or softcover as well. So this is an example of Coptic stitch. I think this looks a bit more complicated, but sort of, I think when you get into the groove of doing this, it kind of feels like you kind of get used to it. It feels like knitting or something. And then lastly, the case-bound book or the hardcover book. So I don't have an example of one that I've done because the one that I have done is really shitty. But I have done a nice one before, but I lost it, unfortunately. But basically, obviously, you've probably all seen a hardcover book before, and it's really fun when you're able to do it by hand because you can kind of get this like neat professional look and kind of use all the fun elements that I showed earlier. And it, you know, obviously protects the pages really well because the cover is hard. And yeah, so if you have time to kind of sort of watch the tutorial on this, I recommend it because it's pretty fun and the result can be pretty rewarding. So here, as I've mentioned, there's no need to memorize any technique. For me, I definitely am referencing kind of sewing patterns and things all the time. So using the internet as a resource is really great. And then I just wanted to mention also design considerations, and just, it can be really fun to kind of like select the materials that you want to use, but it's also good to consider what you're going to use your book for, because that can dictate the decisions that you make for like the binding style, if like you need it to lay flat. Like if you're sort of wanting to make a book that you're going to write in or reference or have laying on a table, you probably want a binding style that lays flat. Obviously, you'll think about like how much you want to spend on the book that you want to make, what tools that you already have, how much time you have, who you're making it for. So I just like to include this too, because it's fun to sort of, you know, have the design be intentional, and it just makes the result that much better, I think. And so here, just showing to always be on the lookout for inspiration for different different materials that you can use. So over the years, like I mentioned, I kind of have accumulated a bunch of random material like board and different types of fabric and sort of patterned paper and stuff like that to use just with binding books too. So again, just a little section on design considerations here. And then I just pulled a few references. So generally, I recommend Sea Lemon. She's like a YouTuber, and she sort of, I think now has more like lifestyle-y type of things, but like her older videos are just straight up DIYs on how to make certain types of binding techniques. So I definitely recommend that. And then obviously just, you could sort of just look up the type of book that you're trying to bind, and there's probably so many videos on how to do it too. And then just as far as like where to get stuff, I usually just go to Artists and Craftsmen in Cambridge or Blick or Michael's or something. And then obviously anywhere online is, you know, you can find anything at this point. I think Etsy probably has some cool kits and stuff that you can buy. And then lastly, Talus is just sort of this online store. It's like, I think it's based in New York or something like that, but it's a bit more, it has more of that like nerdy bookbinding stuff. Like like headbands and book cloth and things like that for hardcover books and things. So yeah, I think that's all I have for the deck piece of it. Did we have any questions on that before we kind of look at some of the demos?
Yeah, quick question in the chat.
Mhm.
You mentioned Sea Lemon. Was there someone was asking about the specific person's name, but it sounds like it's one
Oh,
a lady who does say Sea
yeah,
Lemon. Okay.
it's just the one lady. Yeah.
I've actually used her
Yeah,
tutorials in the past. They're super good. I agree.
I know. Yeah, they're good. Yeah, I like them a lot.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like in our zine collection what the weirdest binding we've seen. I've seen I think people have used like manila folders as like the cover for things. Very
Totally.
like scrappy. Um someone has bound hair into like a cover, which was
Oh, wow.
bold.
That is bold.
Oh, we got some more questions in the chat. Judy asks, can you show more examples of books you've made? And do you personally vary in the size of books that you make?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I have the ones that we just looked at, and then I have like a couple more that I've made from school. But yeah, I've made some pretty big ones. The thing is you have to have just larger paper. So if you have like tabloid size paper, you can make some pretty big ones. This is the hardcover book that I was talking about, and I didn't really want to show it because it just like creaks when I open it, and it's just like poorly done when I was like really stressed out as a senior in college. But yeah, so this one's pretty big, but I did perfect bind this too, because when you perfect bind, they're flat sheets, and so you don't have to fold them to make the books smaller too. And I can just show like a couple of pages of this. There's like some cool spreads in here that have like, yeah, like I think this kind of looks neat with like the black printing on black paper and then white paper. So it's pretty cool to like switch, you know, the paper types that actually go inside of the book. And some people have like clear vellum in their book, so you can kind of see, you know, what is on the other side of the page and things like that. So definitely kind of different materials. This one too, I like put this like mini book in the book, which is like so extra, but like when you're in design school, you kind of do shit like that. And then let's see if I have another one. Ooh, this is a good example of a perfect bound book, and this one's pretty big too. So this was like you know, like a magazine project or whatever in college, but that'd be so funny to like see a magazine this big like at the store. But this was actually sort of the best perfect bind that I've done. Probably it actually like lays pretty flat. Yeah. So I think it's like the more paper you use, the better. Like the more likely it'll lay flat. And then, yeah, I don't know if I have like, I wish I had a better hardcover, example. This is another one that was the Japanese stab bound, but I didn't kind of go off the corner, so I thought that was kind of neat.
I love the colors. We have another question in the chat actually about perfect binds.
Yeah.
Is there or Dr. Nazaris asks, how long can a perfect bind last? Like, do you ever see pages falling out, I'm guessing? Or like,
definitely. It's a good point. I personally don't tend to do a lot of perfect bound books. I think that you can make them so that they last forever. And the type of glue that you would use is one that is archival, so that it does, like by nature of the material that you're using, it should be able to like stay. But generally when I make them, it's kind of easy to tear pages out, and sort of, I don't know, like when I hear the crack in the spine when I open it, I'm like I don't know, I'm not quite sure, but I think there definitely are ways to like make it last, longer, especially if it's being made by a machine. Yeah. But that perfect bound book I made like what, 5-7 years ago or something like that. I don't even know. But I also don't like read it every day.
another question in the chat, Taylor asks, what type of glue would you recommend for perfect binds?
Yeah, so I didn't bring my glue in here, but basically anything that says like bookbinding specific or archival, or it says PVP on it. So basically it's sort of just like, it looks like a bottle and it has like a nozzle on it usually. And you know, it's white, dries clear, and it usually says like specific to bookbinding on it. I think you can use other types of glue, but it might not be like as strong as like actual bookbinding glue. And that's stuff that I would like get from the book as well.
Another question from Gabby. Have you ever sewn a perfect bind before gluing, or like would that help?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I have, but I have before, but does that count as a perfect bound if it's not loose sheets? Because I've like case stitched books and then glued over the thread to make it like mega strong for like a hardcover book. But I used folded sheets, so yeah. So maybe.
It sounds like you could kind of like pick and choose these techniques and sort of combine them. So.
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
All right. It looks like the chat has slowed down, so maybe we can keep going with the demos and folks can chime in as well.
Awesome, cool. Great. So the first one that I was going to do is just a simple saddle stitch book. So I'm going to just grab my things here. Great. So basically to make a saddle stitch book, and I'm just going to pull up the diagram for me to reference the sewing pattern here and take a sip of water. Great. So basically for a saddle stitch book, again, the idea is that it's a stack of folded sheets that are kind of placed within one another and then bound through the spine. So you would open it like this and sort of put your needle in here all the way to the outside of the spine. And that's how you would connect all the pages together. So I can show you the best way to do that. Basically what you want to do is fold all your sheets. So so this saddle stitch book is just like a letter size. So the size finished will be half letter size. And so I just fold the sheet and then you kind of take however many sheets that you want to saddle stitch. And I really don't recommend too many because they kind of, you might want your book to close. So, you know, maybe like, I think I have like 8 sheets or something like that for this one. So in the end, it will be 16 pages, 8 times 2. And so once you have all your sheets folded, and I kind of folded some of mine in advance just so we could do this a little bit quicker, just then kind of figuring out where the holes go. So you could do this really precisely with a ruler and kind of measure from the center like where each of the 5 holes are going to go. But I sort of did this a little bit more quickly in advance, just so I don't have to spend time measuring and stuff. And then once you sort of mark those where the thread is going to go with a pencil, you can use an awl or use a needle and just kind of poke your holes through here in advance. And I do kind of recommend doing like the holes in advance because it'll just make it a lot easier when you get to actually sewing, so you don't have to both like push your needle through and kind of pull the thread through. So a good way to do that is just sort of to fold the page a little bit while you're on your awl and then actually press through so that the needle is like going through the page.
Quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have a way? Can you make the video half of your screen wider so that we see more of you and less of the PDF?
Let's try that. That's a good idea. Can everyone see just me? Is this any better, Marie?
You're definitely front and center now, so I think that's good.
Okay, great. Hi. More Bogle. Okay. So yeah, I think this should help a little bit more. And then so then once you have like the holes in like one page, you can kind of use that as a template for your other pages. So I'm just gonna, and you can kind of do these 2 at a time, but maybe it gets just harder the more you use, like the more sheets that you want to do at a time. But if you only have like 8 sheets, it really doesn't take that long. So what I did was I just put my template with the holes in it already, like over top 2 more sheets. And then you kind of just do the same thing where you push the holes through the paper. And this does make it easier in the long run. And yeah, the awl is good too, because it's just a little bit more comfortable to hold than a needle. I think I fucked that up a little bit. That'll just be a big hole. And so I'll do that for a couple more sheets and then we should be good.
Taylor asks, can you use the needle you're using to sew to make the holes? Sounds like yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Another good thing too that like a little hack is that if you have a thumbtack, that's even a little bit easier than using your needle too. I just feel like when I'm using my needle, the end of the needle is actually pretty sharp. And so when I'm pushing it in with my thumb, it kind of hurts a little bit, but you can totally use a needle. And I think it's even like, if you're using sort of printer paper, that's actually pretty thin paper. And so it's a little bit less like pushing that you have to do. So definitely, if you don't have an awl, that the next thing I would use is probably a needle. Great. So now I'm going to just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sheets just because it's a little quicker. What you want to do is just put your folded sheets all together and kind of stack them. So you are kind of starting to see what the book is going to feel like. And one thing I have too is a cover paper. So I didn't want to have my cover paper be the same that I'm using on the inside, just so that there's just more of a design on the outside and it's a little thicker to protect my inside pages. So I have this little illustration pattern that I did, and I can just show you how to score this page. So I can fold it in half and put it over top the text pages. So this is something that you might like obviously are going to require those kind of key tools, but if you don't have it, you can totally just like fold the cover sheet just like you did the other one. This one is just kind of thick because I mounted it, so it's not gonna really fold for me. So I have to score it first. Okay. So I have my cutting mat here, and since this page is a letter size sheet, halfway down is 5.5 inches. And so what I'm going to do is just align it on my cutting mat, see where 5.5 inches is right here, lay my ruler down right at the 5.5 inch mark and kind of align my ruler on both sides, top and bottom. And then take the bone folder I have here to create a score. So I just push the bone folder up against the ruler above the page and then press down on this hand so that I'm creating even pressure on the ruler. And then just get as close and perpendicular as you can to the page with the bone folder and just run it down. And I usually do this just a couple times, especially if you have a thicker sheet, you kind of want to hit this paper, but you also want to hit this paper with the fold. So just going a couple times here, and hopefully that's straight enough to where when I fold it, it'll be sort of a nice, nice straight fold. So go like that. And usually I can just use my hand to kind of fold it over, but then what I'll also do is use the bone folder to kind of run along the fold as well. And sometimes when I do that, I like to just put a piece of paper on my cover so I don't ruin the design that I had drawn on here, because like on my bone folder, I have some like crud on it, and so I don't want to get it on the paper. So you can just do that to kind of push this down. And another bone folder kind of thing that you can use if you don't have one is like a credit card, for example. That's good for scoring things. It's a little less helpful for like pushing things down and kind of getting like a fold really flat, because this is a little bit thicker than a credit card, but it's definitely good for like getting air bubbles out of like glue if you're gluing paper together. So that looks pretty good, actually. Wow, yeah, that looks pretty good, just as far as like, sometimes like I'll do it uneven and then you kind of get like the one half is like taller than the other, and it kind of is sad, but you can trim it off anyway. So that's the cover that I have, and I'm going to take the template page that I have and just again push those awl marks, or just push those holes into the cover as well. So that, kind of stack them to make sure that it's aligned, and then push this through. And this is a little bit thicker, but try to go as quickly as I can.
So you mentioned trimming the book. Are you using, like, the paper looks pretty much the same size, but do you usually end up having to trim anyway?
Yeah, I usually do. And the reason why is even if the paper is the same size, and I will show you an example here, is when the paper is sort of stacked into sheets like this, the outermost sheet is actually going to be shorter on this side, just because, you know, obviously it's like pushing it. So the middle of the page is going to be longer. I don't know if I can angle this correctly, but yeah, I don't know if you can see that, but basically it's like some of the pages are longer than the other just by nature of it. So at the end, after I bind everything together, that's when I sort of trim the edge off so that the cover and the text pages are all the same length. And that's why the this stuff comes in handy too, because then once you have like a stack of paper, you can just trim it all off at the same time.
We have a question in the chat from Mia, who asks, is there a standard distance between the holes punched by the awl, or is it a ratio to the size of the book, or things like that?
Do you mean like the distance between the holes, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, usually it really depends on like how you want it. Like you could totally, like I could totally imagine like having like a really short one that kind of could look cool if you just had thread like in the middle or something like that. But usually what I do is try to have it just even. So the way that I marked this originally was I just like I'll just take an example, was that I just had it on my cutting mat. I determined where 5.5 inches was because that's right down the middle of what I have for this size sheet. Or wait, not this way, this way. Yeah, or whatever. And so I just like marked the middle, and then I'll like you can measure it out so that it's like equidistant across them if you want to, but it kind of takes a little bit of time. I usually just will then like, I have a pen. I'll just like mark where the middle is, and then I'll mark where one end is, and then I'll sort of like eyeball to see like what's equidistant from here and here. So that's even, and then I'll just mark the middle between both of those. So if you are doing like a 5-hole one like this, like you can totally just eyeball it, or like if you want to measure it out, that's totally fine too. But it's like up to you in the end.
Thanks. And you can do more than 5 holes, right? But it just does. It has to be an odd number, right? I think.
Yeah, I think it has to be like I don't know, yeah, like odd, or it's probably one of those number terms.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to the diagram you had and like how the thread goes.
Right. I feel like I have a picture of it somewhere, but yeah, maybe not. But yeah, usually it's 5 holes, and like maybe I can just share again. Yeah, so like this I might keep up while I'm doing it, just because I will be referencing it too. So this is like the pattern that I'm following here. I feel like I was referencing this diagram and it wasn't even up. So once you kind of have like the cover, and the cover has like the holes punctured and all the pages have the holes punctured, you can start binding the book together. So basically I have thread that I've already threaded into the needle, just because it takes me time to put a piece of thread into a needle. So I just did it in advance. But this has been pre-waxed, like I already waxed this thread. And here I can just show you an example of how I would have done that. So basically you have your thread, and then you just kind of push it up against the block of wax and then just pull it through. And then do it to the other side. So you're kind of like evenly coating the thread. As far as the length of the thread with the book, it depends on the way that you're binding it, but I think generally sort of 4 times the width, or I think I did 3 times the width for this one, 3.5, 4. It's better to have more than to run out, generally for like how much thread you want for the book. So let me look at my diagram here. Okay, great. So I think for this one, you start from the outside, right? No. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna start from the outside. So I'm gonna push it through here, and I'm gonna do it through the cover first. And I'm not creating a knot yet, but I will at the end. So have that, and then I'll push it through my text pages here. You kind of just like wiggle it on, and if you have to do a couple at a time, that's fine. It'll get easier once you kind of make one, attach it through one stitch, because then it'll all kind of be sealed together through one. So I think that's good. Sorry, this is going to be a little clunky. And then I'll go through the rest of the pages here.
Oh, good. Gives people a chance to follow along if they want to.
So I'm in all my pages here. I'm going to reference back my diagram. So I've gone in. Okay. And then I think, so, and then the second hole. Okay. So I'm going to go through the top one. And see, this was so much easier now that I have like it through one. I think it just is also easier going from the inside out for some reason. So you're kind of, the fold works with you a little bit more. So that's what that looks like. I'm on the outside again. So I've got,
Whoa, come up through the end.
Okay, I'm gonna go through this one now, sort of that top one.
And then you're gonna go down.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of return the needle through this, I think.
Do you have a good way to estimate how much thread you'll need? A question in the chat asks, could you show us what to do if we run out of thread? And then
I don't, I would have to look that up. Usually I try to be pretty good about not running out of thread for like something simple like this. Like if you were to do like a Coptic Stitch book, there's no way in heck that you could do it without replacing your thread, because there's so much thread that you would be using. But for something like this, I would recommend, usually like this I have right here is like 3.5 times the height of the book. So 3.5, 4, sometimes if you want to go 5, it's kind of hitting that sweet spot. If you have too much, it'll be kind of hard to work with. Is one thing. So I usually do like 3.5, 4 times the height.
makes sense.
And as you're doing this too, you just want to keep pulling it tight as you go through. So I'm returning it through the center one, pulling it kind of tight. Pull the side. Oops, something happened. And then go in here. So these aren't quite aligning. Okay. All right. So that's where I'm at so far. Oops, something happened here. Okay, and then, so I'm almost there. Okay. And then now I'm getting back to the center fold. So I'm going to go in there one last time. And then, how do I do this? How do I finish this? Oh God. Yeah, something happened. I think I need to somehow bring it back out. But yeah, maybe I'll create a knot first and I'll bring it back out. So I'm gonna just push my needle through here and create a knot. Kind of try to get it aligned right on here. Yeah, obviously, ooh, that's, oh my God, I just broke it. Hulk strength, that's terrible. Well, anyway, I don't know if I can fix this on the fly like that, but basically, it still works, I guess. That's a bummer. If I were just by myself at home, what I would probably do, what I just did was I broke my string on the inside trying to create a knot like a big noob. I'm sorry, this workshop.
You're showing us what not to do. This is a realistic view at what bookbinding is.
It's realistic. But what I would probably do if I was just like by myself would be just to like to cut this off and kind of restart it again, because it doesn't take a terribly long time, which is what I probably will do afterwards. But essentially, what I don't know where I went wrong here, but maybe what I would have done was I would have made the knot on the inside, pulled it out to the outside, and then finished it with like a double knot so you could see like the thread, the sort of the knot on the outside. I think if I started doing it the opposite way, then it would have shown up on the inside, which is if you wanted to like hide where the knot was, you could sort of start it the opposite way and the knot would have been on the inside. So that's one that's one that I was going to do. Hopefully that was helpful. Sorry, I kind of like somehow fucked this up at the end, but yeah.
Is there ever a case of like too much? Oh, Judy S had to trim it so that everything looks even and stuff.
Yes, I'll trim this one. Normally what I would do is like I would get the binding right before I trim it so that it was like really really tight together. But what I'll do here actually is since I'm not sure if this is going to hold from my mistake, I'm just going to clip it down with a bulldog clip before I clip it together. So basically what I'm doing is I just have a clip and I'm putting a piece of paper over it so the clip doesn't sort of stain the book, just to hold it together. And then to trim off the edges, like as you can see, the cover is a bit shorter than the pages on the inside. So I want to just trim it off to get like a clean, just like a clean edge. So basically you want to do this after you've finished binding, so all the pages are together and will be like that's the way that they're going to line up. So this is great too if you've scored like your cover, for example, a little askew and like it's a little bit sort of uneven on the end. This is another good way to just like fix it later. So I'm going to grab my ruler, and it's obviously a little bit trickier to cut like multiple pages, and it takes a little bit longer just because you have to kind of run your knife through it several times. But what I'm going to do is just align it best I can, and I'm actually not going to try to cut off any of my cover because I actually got a pretty good score on that. So I'm just going to take off refill my knife. You just kind of, I'm just kind of clipping off the edge of my knife to get a cleaner blade. You really want your blade to be sharp for this. So basically, if you can see, I have my ruler here and it's aligned where my text pages are, and I take my knife, I make it so the blade is sort of like not a little bit open, but like a lot open. And then I will just kind of again start above the page, and let's see if I can get a better angle on this. No, worse. I kind of feel like it was fine. And then again, try to get the blade like really kind of shoved up to the ruler and make it so that they're kind of parallel flat next to each other, and try to get the knife just like as straight up as you can. If your knife is sort of like angled one way or another, you're going to see that when you cut into the pages, especially since we have like a stack of pages. So I'm going to just run my knife through, and again, just pushing down with this hand, create an even pressure on the ruler, and then just go through. And this is something where you don't want to press actually too hard. I'm a little bit off my cutting board, so I'm gonna move up, because then you'll start to get like jagged edges on the paper. So you kind of do want to just do it lightly. I think I misaligned a little bit. But basically just do it lightly and kind of just do it a bunch of times. I think we got it already, actually, since this is only 8 sheets. And I could probably do another one just because it isn't quite to where the cover is, but it is a lot flatter as far as like sort of the innermost page isn't like as pushed out and stuff like that. So yeah, that's how you would trim a book. And sort of like with multiple pages.
Is there a limit to how many pages you would recommend trimming in this way?
So I have actually, honestly, all the books that I've done, even like the really thick ones, like the Perfect Bound magazine and stuff, I've done using this method. So if you're like really steady-handed and like can get just like a clean, like very perpendicular cut, you can do it like pretty successfully, even for thicker books. If you had like a really thick book and you've printed, like you're invested in like the paper that you've printed on and stuff like that, it probably is better to use like a machine called a guillotine, or like a, I don't know what else it's called. That's the only
Paper
way.
cutter kind of thing? It's like,
What is it?
oh, like a paper cutter, but the one with the arm.
So the one with the arm is like, I've used those like, but the thing is with that, you still kind of have like a limit to it because you're trying to get everything in like one swipe. Whereas with this method, you can do sort of multiple, which I guess you could with like one of the sewing ones, but those are, I have like, I would prefer this over doing that. But a guillotine like is a more kind of like machine that you can, it's sort of like, I can probably like send you all a picture of this, but it's just like kind of a machine that you would put the book into, and then there's like a huge blade that like comes down and like cuts everything off. Like they have them at like printing presses and stuff like that. The more professional grade ones, I think you can get like ones for like more in the house or office, but I think they're probably kind of expensive, and really you would kind of need one if you're making like a lot of thick books. But I don't have one, and I don't really use them.
Also, Judy asks, do you have a specific ruler that you'd recommend?
So this ruler is the only one that I've ever used. It's called a Lumi Cutter. And I mean, I've had this since college, so I think it's just from Blick. You can probably get them at Arts and Craftsman, but it is good for the ruler to be aluminum, just because if you're using like plastic or wood, obviously your blade is going to quickly destroy it. So by using aluminum, it's better just to get like a cleaner cut, and it, obviously will last longer. The other thing that's nice about this ruler is it has a finger guard. So it has like a raised part right here, so that like when I'm holding my fingers up against it, the blade isn't going to cut me. And then the other nice thing that you might want to consider is having like, this is sort of like a foam that's on the bottom of my ruler, and it allows me to sort of press and it won't sort of slip around. So those are sort of the qualities that I might look for if I were to buy another ruler. And they make ones that are even longer than this. This one is 24 inches, but I don't really make books that are much larger than this. And then same, if you're kind of considering size for the cutting mat, you just want to, like I could use a bigger cutting mat if I was making like big books like the ones I showed you a lot, but I don't. So I just use this sort of like 16 inch cutting mat. And as long as it's like can accommodate 2 of most of the size books that you're going to make, that's probably enough so that you can like spread it out like this.
Right. It looks like we're at time, so I want to make sure folks have a moment to ask questions if they'd like. Does anyone want to just jump in with Q&A before we close with contact info? Or I know, Steph, you had a second demo. If folks are interested and you're free, maybe we could like run over time, but I want to be cognizant of everyone's schedules. Any questions?
I'm happy to do it still. So
So I think it sounds like there's no questions in the chat. I think I'll toss up a couple of our closing slides with contact info in case folks have any questions, and then we can hang around and then kind of do whatever after. All right, so what I should have said first was thank you so much, Stephanie. This was an awesome workshop. It's been
good.
super awesome to get to learn about all this. I wanted to let people know about our upcoming events. We have another free Skillshare happening on January 5th. So it'll be fresh after the new year. We'll see what 2021 has to offer. And we're going to have an awesome guest talking about how to make a podcast. It's a great thing to do as your New Year's resolution. So if anyone's interested in that, we'll have info up soon. And then if you want to keep in touch with whatever else is going on, Stephanie's contact info is on screen as bogle.com, all our cool projects. And then Papercut's got a website, we've got an Instagram and a Facebook. So you can tune in and be up to date.
Awesome. Yeah, feel free to email me if you have questions or anything. Totally open to that. And also, I can totally share the PDF. Or I shared with you already, Marie. So if you want to disseminate that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I saw the question in the chat before I was doing screen stuff. We can. I think I'll send an email out to everyone who got tickets to the event. I think that's the way we'll do it. We can circle back about getting it on the website. But I think definitely check your emails.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, everyone. I really had so much fun. I really appreciate it.